Welcome back, everybody, to Joshua's Magic. It's a channel about how the ordinary material world reality and the spiritual reality intersect. And when matter and spirit come together, it produces the soul. So it's fitting today, the topic is the soul or the higher self. I'll be reading through a number of quotes today from my Instagram and discussing them. And at the end of after I'm done discussing the quotes, we're going to have a meditation on the higher self. So I hope you all stick around for that. But on to the first quote. You can find these on Instagram or Minds. I have the link to my channel at Joshua's Magic in the description below. My brother, I have earlier indicated to you the point of view from which I personally gauge the capacity and growth of the group from the capacity and the growth of the group, and from that angle, I am pleased with the progress you have made. By the way, this is from Discipleship in the New Age, which is a series of letters that Tibetan wrote to disciples within this group he had at one point. During the past few years, I have many times spoken to you with frankness and even with apparent harshness. This I have done in an effort to galvanize you to greater oriented reaction to the urge of your soul, and thus draw away from the two factors which have blocked the free intercourse which should exist between you and your soul, between your soul and your personality. I have ever hinted. I do not voice my suggestion in clear words at all times, for my objective is always to evoke the activity of your higher self, and thus exacting the correct type of obedience. So this is a very interesting and kind of profound statement here. And anybody who's read the Alice Bailey books knows that the Tibetan will often say things in a kind of, it might seem confusing or vague or cryptic or even self-contradictory way. But right now he's talking about this one person, but in general, the books are designed to elicit you to think, to you to develop your consciousness and try to tune into the intuition about things instead of everything being perfectly laid out for you and totally clear and correct manner. And the correct type of obedience is occult obedience, which is the obedience of you to your soul, not you to an outward teacher or a set of ideas or some other authority. So in the true teacher-student relationship, you're tuning into your soul and running what the teacher says by your soul. You know, you give the teacher sort of the benefit of the doubt, otherwise you wouldn't be at this person's class or whatever. But it's ultimately between you and your soul what you move forward with. And so continue on, he says, what are these two factors? The two factors which have been limiting him from a more free exchange of the soul and personality. One, a life activity which, though somewhat balanced by the work done in my group, has nevertheless had a restricting effect, and which does not succeed in invoking the highest powers of your soul. You have tried to meet the situation and to raise the general tone, but one lone disciple is hard put to it to offset the vibration of a powerful, astrally polarized group. Do you know to what I refer? And he also does this, he like references things in their lives that he doesn't clearly spell out, but they'll presumably understand what he's talking about, or they did. Two, a life tendency towards depression, which you have amazingly offset by negation and a persistent attitude of service. It is nevertheless complicated your life pattern, and yet has been one of your major educators. This life experience has netted you big results, and you will enter upon the next cycle of phenomenal existence with much upon which to draw, having worked out many life relations during this particular incarnation. So yeah, the key takeaway from there is the not being 100% clear about everything, because it throws it back on the individual to come to the truth themselves, to understand it in the right way. Whereas if everything's just laid out for you and you're just told do this, you know, it puts your mind into a state of receptivity and just automatically going with things instead of a more positive, proactive search for the truth or understanding yourself. So the next quote It's from Consciousness of the Atom. And this one was written by Alice Bailey herself. The other Alice Bailey books, the Tibetan, most of the other Alice Bailey books, the Tibetan communicated these ideas to her to write down. But this book is, I believe, a collection of speeches she gave, and they were compiled into this book. So here we go. The final thing I seek to bring out tonight is the goal for each of us is the development of the powers of the soul or the psyche. This means that you and I are going to be psychics, but I'm not using the word psychic as it is usually understood, nor in its everyday connotation. The psyche is literally the soul within, or the higher self, who emerges from out of the threefold self as the butterfly emerges out of the chrysalis. It is that beautiful reality which we are going to produce as a result of our life, our lives down here. The true psychic powers are those which put us in contact with the group. The powers of the physical body, which we use every day, put us in contact with individuals. But when we have developed the powers of the soul and we have unfolded its potentialities, we shall be true psychics. Now, what are those powers? All I can do tonight is to enumerate a few out of the many. And by the way, a number of ordinary psychic powers aren't necessarily from the soul. So some of these psychic impressions people have are from the astral emotional body. They're not really coming from the soul. And you can channel astral entities and have them tell you things, but that's not what she's talking about here. But when you think of psychics, you think of stuff like that, where the true psychism of the soul is on a higher level than that. One of the main so she's going to enumerate a few of the powers of the soul. One is the conscious control of matter. The majority of us control our physical bodies consciously, making them carry out our behests upon the physical plane. Some of us control our emotions consciously, but very few of us can control the mind. Most of us are controlled by our desires, by our thoughts, but the time is coming when we shall consciously control our threefold lower nature. Time will then not exist for us at all. We shall have that continuity of consciousness upon the three planes of being, physical, emotional, and mental, which will enable us to live as does the Logos, in that very metaphysical abstraction, the eternal now. And that's kind of hard to comprehend, but I think something to understand it would be that time only exists on the physical, emotional, and mental plane. And you go higher than that, there isn't any time in some sense anyway. So when all of those vehicles are aligned, they're seen as an illusion and you exist in the eternal now, even though in that illusionary realm, there's still time going on, but you're sort of out of it or above it to some degree. Another power of the soul is psychometry. Now, what is psychometry? It might be defined as the ability to make a tangible something belonging perhaps to an individual, and through the medium of that, to put oneself in rapport with that individual or with a group of individuals. Psychometry is the law of association of ideas applied to the vibratory quality of force for the purpose of obtaining information. So those are some of the powers of the soul, and there's more. But it's an interesting analogy she makes to the butterfly of unfolding out of the threefold lower man, the mental, emotional, and physical. And that's what we're here to do. We're trying to unfold the soul out of our lower consciousness that we're currently in. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, if you appreciate it, please leave a like on it. It really helps me out, and it would help get these ideas out to more people so we can spread that ageless wisdom some more. So the next quote, this is about the soul and healing. The third group is that of magnetic healers. These healers have no relation to the work of the so-called magnetic healers of today. They work intelligently with the vital forces of the etheric body. Much of their work is dealt with in the fourth volume of A Treatise on the Seven Rays. I believe that's esoteric healing. This group of healers must bring about the right healing of the personalities of individuals in all aspects of their nature. The work to be done is that of intelligent transmission of energy to the various parts of the nature, mental, emotional, and physical. Through the right orientation and the circulation of force, present-day healers should endeavor to break loose from the modern and traditional ideas as to healing. They should recognize the stupendous fact that healing must eventually be carried forward by groups, which will act as intermediaries between the plane of spiritual energy, either soul energy, intuitional energy, or will energy, and the patient or group of patients. Note this last point. The group idea must always be remembered by the students as they work. They must not work as individuals, but as units in a coherent whole. This will distinguish the New Age methods from the past, for the work will be group work, and usually for a group. Magnetic healers must learn to work as souls and not as individuals. They must learn to communicate healing energy from the reservoir of living force to the patient or patients. So there's a few things here. One is the importance of group work, that's where we're headed evolutionarily, to work in groups, and not just sort of like herds just going with the flow, but consciously cooperating as a group. You develop the individual consciousness, and you're not just being led from one thing to another. But after you've developed that, it's to develop a group consciousness and the consciousness of the soul, because the soul is what connects all of us on a deeper level. So these healers in the future won't be working as like one healer laying on hands with somebody else, but it'll be a group of healers which will have greater access to energy and probably greater control over it. We'll be using that energy to heal a group of people, or at times maybe one person. But that second aspect, emerging out of matter, the isolation of matter into the sort of group nature of the soul is where we're headed. So that's something worth thinking on. And as always, I'm curious to hear anybody's thoughts on these quotes or my commentary. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments below. And this one, I started putting my own thoughts in some posts. So it's a little weird to read my own words, but here we go. I've given much thought to the subject of soul contact and what I might say to those seeking it. My path to establishing a clearer channel to the soul was in practicing the Latihan of Subud. However, simply exhorting others to follow the same path I did would not be helpful in many cases, unless they were inclined to that practice. I can think of several things necessary or useful to making or strengthening a connection with one's soul or higher self. Firstly, awakening your consciousness to the soul requires that you begin to value its direction and impulses over those coming from your personality. Over many lifetimes, we have built up and attuned our consciousness to our personality's thoughts and desires. This creates a strong pull in a lower direction, analogous to the gravity of Earth. In order to break free from its pull, one must be motivated to follow whatever comes from your inner self, or the gravity of your personality will pull you back into a lower consciousness. Another necessity, which builds on the first, is meditation, or focused attention. The promptings of the soul start small, and maybe even imperceptibly at first. Maintaining your attention on making soul contact, or any guidance you receive from your soul, no matter how small, is like watering a plant consistently. If maintained, it will lead to growth over time. Overstimulation can occur if meditation is followed too zealously. Meditating for a few minutes a day, or maybe even a week if just starting out, would likely be advisable. Another method is to have your goal in your consciousness throughout the day, not with the same level of focus when someone sits down to meditate, but using it as a seed thought or focus in the back of the mind. So, yeah, there's just some preliminary thoughts on ways to establish soul contact when you're at that point. And the regular meditation thing people talk about a lot, but I haven't really heard people talk about this method I use of having kind of the back of your mind devoted to a certain goal or idea or symbol. I mean, I only do that when the soul directs me to it. I don't just do it because I want to. But I feel that really has power in maintaining that throughout the day, that kind of connection. Um, yeah, I'm interested in people's thoughts on that. So let me know if that makes sense or resonates at all with you. And the last quote is, it now becomes possible to consider the process whereby a man bridges the gulf or gap, speaking symbolically, which exists between the personal lower self and the higher self, as the latter functions in its own world. This has to be bridged before at-one-ment can be achieved, and complete integration of the entire man can be brought about. To understand clearly what occurs, it will be wise to define more accurately what that higher nature is and of what it consists. We have seen in our studies that the soul is a dual blend of energies, the energy of life and the energy of mind. As far as its relation to the mechanism is temporarily concerned, as far as the relation, the merging of these two energies in the human mechanism produces what we call consciousness. At first, self-consciousness, and finally, group consciousness. The mechanism, in its own nature, also a blend or fusion of the energies, the energy of substance itself, which takes the form of the atomic structure of the physical body, plus the vitality which animates the body, and secondly, the energy of that body which we call the astral plane, distinguished by sensitivity, emotional activity, and that magnetic force which we call desire. There is finally the energy of mind itself. These four types of energy form what we call the lower self. So the physical, the etheric, which vitalizes the physical, the astral or emotional, and then the mind or the mental. These four types of energy, form what we call the lower personal self. But it is the higher mental aspect of the mind which links subjectively this personality and the soul. It is the lower consciousness which, when developed, enables a man to eventually to make conscious contact with the higher. It is the lower concretized mind which must be awakened, understood, and used with definiteness before the higher mind can become the medium through which knowledge can be gained of those realities which constitute the kingdom of God. Intellect must be unfolded before the intuition can be correctly evoked. So this is getting at another important point in soul contact and spiritual development, is that the personality of the lower self needs to be developed to a certain point before you can start shifting your consciousness to the soul. You know, it's like you can't just step your toe in the pool and then go home and be like, oh, I learned how to swim, we're done. The soul needs a useful vehicle on the physical plane and the emotional and mental plane to be able to use. And until you've developed those vehicles to the point where you're able to use them with a lot of facility, there's no point in making soul contact. It's not what the soul wants. It's not, in the plan of things. So the last point of that is developing the mind, because people have developed the physical body and the emotions largely to an adequate degree. Still work to be done on that, but it's the mind that people have trouble with, developing the mind, thinking clearly. And it's said in some theosophical things that the mind is like needs to be a fattened calf to be sacrificed. You have to develop the mind, and then you have to let go of the sort of lower concrete thinking in favor of the soul and the intuition coming. You can look at all these variables and say, oh, well, this plus this equals this, so I have to do this. But that's a limited perspective just based on the variables you have, and hence the flaw that logic can have at times. Whereas the soul has this wider, all-encompassing perspective. And you might be guided to do something that doesn't really make sense concretely, but if you could see it from a higher perspective, it would make sense. So I hope you guys enjoyed those quotes. Check me out on Instagram or Minds if you'd like to get those each day, weekdays anyway. But I'm going to move into a little meditation. I'm going to leave it somewhat open form for people. So it fits with where they are. But there's a group unity and all of us doing this together. And so there's sort of extra power instead of doing it alone. So I'm going to share this background so there's something to look at here. And again, feel free to pause the video if you need more time. But get comfortable, lie down if you need to, and focus your consciousness in the mind, setting your emotional nature down, allowing your anxieties and fear. And use the mind to think concretely about what you're doing now, about what's going on in your life. And after a few minutes of exercising your mind and trying to think clearly about your situation and what might come, we're going to move on to the next step. Now, having engaged your mind and taken stock of things, imagine an opening above you and allow the light of the soul to pour into the situation or conditions you were thinking about, and allow it to reveal what you were missing there. Take some time with that. All right, and slowly begin to come back to your normal consciousness, or pause the video if you want more time. But what occurs to me is to point out one last thing, that the soul can correct the personality. It's not just that you need to develop your personality, it needs to be perfect before you move on to soul connection. You know, a certain amount of work needs to be done, but when you start with the soul connection, it guides you and helps clear out your personality and purify yourself so that you can keep making progress. So tune into the soul, ask for guidance, and see what comes. I hope you've all appreciated this video. If you have, please leave a like on it and consider sharing it. And if you watched a few of these videos right now, why not subscribe and turn that notification bell on to get notified of more. Till next time, this has been Joshua's Magic. Light and love to you all.